Alright guys, welcome back. So we have just finished Azure Virtual Networks as of now. So there will be review questions that I'm going to take as of now. Right? Okay. Hello guys, welcome back. We have just finished our module fourth, which is all about Azure networking. So now we are going to take a module. This module's review questions. So let's do them one by one. Okay, let's start with the first question. The first question is, your company has an existing Azure tenant. Let me increase the size of it. Okay, so your company has an existing Azure tenant named alpineskihouse.onmicrosoft.com. I've already told you before in this module that whenever you create an account on Azure for the first time, your default directory or your default tenant becomes available on .onmicrosoft.com, right? The company wants to use alpineskihouse.com for their Azure resources because that might be their own custom domain. You add a custom domain to Azure. Now you need to add a DNS record to prepare for verifying the custom domain. Which two of the following record types could you create? So if you remember, I told you when you go to Azure portal and you go to Azure Active Directory, by default your directory comes in by default your tenant is on microsoft.com. But if you want to add your own custom domain, I told you, go to custom domain names, click on add custom domain, write any domain name that you want. In this case it was Alpine Ski House, so I'm using any domain. And once you do that, to verify it, what does Microsoft Azure ask you? It asks you to create either a txt record or an mx record inside your DNS server, right, where your domain is hosted. So what will be the answer for this? The answer for this is add a txt record to the DNS zone or add an mx record to the DNS zone. So second and third will be the answer for this. Okay, add a txt record and add an mx record. Moving on. You are planning to configure networking in Microsoft Azure. Your company has a new Microsoft Azure presence with following network characteristic. One virtual network, one subnet using 192.168.0.0/23, which does not have existing resources. That means the subnet is empty. Your on-premises data center has the following network characteristic: 10 subnet using 192.168.1.0/24 through 192.168.10.0/24. The company intends to use 192.168.1.0/24 on premises and 192.168.0.0/24 in Azure. You need to update your company's environment to enable the needed functionality. What should you do? Okay, to understand this question, let's go to MS Paint. I hope some of you would have understood it. Some of you might not have understood it, but that's fine. We will take care of this. Okay. It says you have a virtual network in Azure, and inside the virtual network you have a subnet, which is this. Let's call it VNet, and let's call it subnet. And the subnet, it says, has an IP address range of 192.168. Let me check again. 0.0/23. Okay. Alright. But this subnet is empty, so there is nothing in the subnet. No VM deployed, nothing at all. Let's look at the second part of the question. It says your on-premises data center has the following network characteristics: 10 subnet using 192.168.1.0/24 to 192.168.10.0/24. So it also says that you have an on-premises network, and within the network you have 10 subnets. So let's say this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So from 1 to 10 you have 10 subnets, and this subnet starts from 192.168.1.0/24, then 2.0/24 up until 192.168.10.0/24, right? So these are 10 different subnets which are available within your virtual network, right? Now, the question is, the company intends to use 192.168.1.0/24 on premises and 192.168.0.0/24 in Azure. You need to update your company's environment to enable the needed functionality. What should you do? Okay, so the question says that your company wants to use this subnet inside your on-premises 1.0/24, and here the company wants to use a virtual network with 192.168.0.0/24. Okay, what should you do? You have been given certain options in here, but first let's understand this question more. See, when you talk about 192.168.0.0/23, this address space is actually inside the address space 192.168.0.0/24. Sorry, it overlaps with 192.168.1.0/24. Okay, so you cannot have 192.168.0.0/23 and 192.168.1.0/24 together, because when this connection will happen, when both Azure Virtual Network and your on-premises network will work together, the overlapping of IP addresses in this subnet and this subnet in your on-premises network will create some problem. But it says that you should have 192.168.1.0/24. That means one has to go, either this one or this one. So this cannot go because it says that your company needs it inside your network. So what we'll do, we will delete this subnet just so to avoid the overlapping. So if you go back to the question, it says choose two options. So the first option will be delete 192.168.0.0/23 from Azure. Why? Because it is overlapping with 192.168.1.0/24. Can you delete the on-premises? No, because it says the company intends to use this on premises. So what option do we have? Since both of them are overlapping, one has to go. So we chose the first one because that wasn't necessarily there within our requirement. It says third option says create a matching public subnet in Azure and in the on-premises environment. That is something entirely different. That will not solve any purpose in here, right? So this cannot be the answer. Fourth one says create a subnet for 192.168.0.0/23 inside the on-premises environment. We do not need it, right? We just need 192.168.1.0/24, and that is already there within the on-premises environment. What we need to do, we need to create a new subnet 192.168.0.0/24 in Azure, because the requirement says the company intends to use 192.168.0.0/24 in Azure. So what do we need to do? See, if you go back to my paint in here, look at this. So this subnet was already there, 192.6, this subnet inside the on-premises network from 1.0/24 to 10.0/24 was already there. Our first problem was both 192.168.0.0/23 and 1.0/24 overlaps in terms of IP addresses. One has to go. We cannot remove this one, so we deleted this. That will become our first answer. The requirement also says that you should have 192.168.0.0/24 available on Azure, so we have to create it on Azure. So what will be the answer for this scenario? The first one, delete 192.168.0.0/23 from Azure, create a subnet for 192.168.0.0/24 in Azure. So first and last are the answer. Review question 3. You are planning your Azure network implementation to support your company's migration to Azure. Your first task is to prepare the deployment of first set of VMs. The first set of VMs that you're deploying has the following requirements. So the question simply says that you're going to Azure and you want to deploy some VMs, starting VMs. There are certain conditions. What are those conditions? Consumer on the internet must be able to communicate directly with the web applications on the VM. Consumers on the internet should be able to communicate with the web applications on the VM. Okay, and the IP configuration must be zone redundant. You need to configure the environment to prepare for the first VM. Additionally, you need to minimize cost whenever possible. which still meets the requirement. What should you do? So basically they say that you have certain VMs that you're creating on Azure portal, right, during your migration phase. Those VMs has web application installed on them. Now those web application will be publicly accessed by the people or the consumer over the internet, right? It says the IP configuration must also be zone redundant. I'll let you know what zone redundant is in a while. It says you have to configure the solution with minimum cost. Okay, let me ask you something. If you have a virtual machine and it has web application installed on it, how does the consumers from the internet will access it? Through its public IP, right? Those VMs should have a public endpoint through which it can communicate with the end users. So first of all, those VMs should have a public IP address. Okay. Now, there are two kinds of public IP address: basic public IP addresses and standard public IP addresses. I will tell you what are the difference between the two of them, right? If you talk about basic public IP addresses, right? Basic public IP addresses are not zone redundant. Standard public IP addresses are zone redundant. Now you will ask what zone redundant is. That we will discuss once we'll come to the application part. As of now, remember, basic IP addresses are not zone redundant. Standard IP addresses are zone redundant. That means the third and fourth option we can remove without even looking at it. Why? Because we want IP configuration which are zone redundant, right? So it says the first two options says create a standard public IP address. Obviously we need a standard public IP address because public IP address is required because consumers are on the internet and they want to access the VM. Second, it says during the creation of first VM, associate the public IP address with the VM's NIC. The second point says after the first VM is created, remove the private IP address and assign the public IP address to the NIC. Now look at the difference between these two statements. The first statement is same, create a public IP address, which we want. Standard public IP address we need to make it zone redundant. Second says during the creation of first VM, associate the public IP address with the VM NIC. Can you do that? Yes, of course. You can do that. During the creation of the VM, there comes an option where you can assign the public IP addresses to the network interface card. The second statement says after the first VM is created, remove the private IP address and assign the public IP address to the NIC. Can you remove a private IP address from a virtual machine? You can never remove it. All virtual machines by default have a private IP address which cannot be removed. The public IP address can be removed. So it says remove the private IP address and assign the public IP address to the NIC. No. NICs by default have the private IP address. It's the public IP that you can attach or detach. So what will be the answer for this? What will be the most suitable answer? The first one. Why? Because the second answer, even though it says uses a standard public IP address which we want, the option itself is not correct. The answer itself is not correct. So first is the answer for this. Okay, you deploy a new domain named contoso.com to domain controllers in Azure. You have the following domain joined VMs in Azure. Okay, so they simply say that you have a new domain contoso.com which is there in Azure, and you have certain domain joined machine. VM1, 10, 20, 30, 10, 10, 20, 30, 11 is VM2, 12 is VM3, and 99 is 10, 20, 40, 101. Okay, you need to add the DNS record so that host name resolve to their respective IP address. Additionally, you need to add a DNS record so that intranet.contoso.com resolve to VM99. What should you do? If you have even the basic knowledge of DNS, how does IP2 name resolution happens? With the help of which record? A record, right? And how do you make sure that you use a name uh, uh, instead of another name? You know that for that you require a CNAME record. So the first condition says you need to add a DNS record so that host name resolve to their respective IP addresses. So for that requirement, what do you need? You need to create an A record for VM1, VM2 and VM3 mapped with their respective IPs. So the first answer is add A records for each VM, the second option. Then it says additionally you need to add a DNS record so that intranet.contoso.com resolve to VM99. So obviously VM99 will have an A record pointing to this IP, but we want this URL intranet.contoso.com pointing to VM99. So in that kind of scenario, what kind of record we uses? We use a CNAME record, the canonical name record for this. So what will be the next answer? This one. Okay. Moving on. So the answer is second and the fifth one. Your company is preparing to move some services and VMs to Azure. The company has opted to use Azure DNS to provide name resolution. A project begins to configure the name resolution. The project identifies the following requirements. So it simply says that you are moving to Azure, and from name resolution, instead of using your own DNS, which we discussed in the last question, you're using Azure DNS for name resolution, which I have already told you inside my previous video. So it says these are the requirement. A new domain will be used. Okay. The domain will have DNS records for internal and external resources. Okay. And minimize ongoing administrative overhead. You need to prepare and configure the environment with a new domain and test hostname of www. Which of the following steps should you perform? Okay, let's go back. It says a new domain will be used. Okay. New domain means you do not have the domain. So what is the first thing that you need to do when you want to have a new domain? You have to buy that domain. You have to register that domain with a domain registrar. Azure DNS is not a domain registrar. Domain registrars are which are domain providers, like GoDaddy is a domain registrar, right? Azure DNS is simply used to host the DNS records. It is not used for registering a domain. So first of all, if you are using a new domain, you have to register that domain. So what will be the first answer? Register a domain name with the domain registrar. Can you register a domain with Microsoft Azure? No, there is no functionality as of now. Okay. Now, the second condition says domain will have DNS records for internal as well as external resources. Okay, here you have to pay attention. Internal and external resources means you will have DNS records for your own VMs, for your own environment, and you will be also keeping the records for external websites as well, external resources as well, right? In this scenario, what do you need? You need to delegate the new domain to Azure DNS, first of all, right? So you have bought the domain, you have registered the domain with domain registrar, but Azure DNS should also know, right? What is your domain name? You have to register your domain over there. You have to verify your domain over inside the Azure DNS, right? And finally, it says you need to prepare and configure the environment with new domain and test the hostname of www. Now you have the domain, the new domain is available to you, you have registered it, you have added it to the Azure DNS. Now simply you can go ahead and create the www record. There is no need to create an A record because that is not required. Glue records don't even, it's not even there. Simply go ahead and add a record for www. So what will be the answer? Register a domain first of all, that means buy a domain. Delegate the new domain to Azure DNS, that means assign it to Azure DNS, make sure Azure DNS knows about this domain, and simply create a www record, right? Now moving on. You have a VM with two NICs named NIC1 and NIC2. NIC1 is connected to 10.10.8.0/24 subnet. NIC2 is connected to the 10.20.8.0/24 subnet. You plan to update the VM configuration to provide the following functionality. Okay, I have already told you that a virtual machine can have multiple NICs, and whether a virtual machine can have two NICs or three NICs, that depends upon the virtual machine size, but a virtual machine can have multiple NICs. In the same scenario, we have a virtual machine with two NICs. Now, what are the requirements? You plan to update the VM configuration to provide the following functionality. Enable direct communication from internet to TCP port 443. Okay. Maintain existing communication across 10.10.8.0/24 and 10.20.8.0/24 subnet, and maintain a simple configuration whenever possible. Okay, so what the question says? The question says that you need to make sure that you allow, the first condition says you allow direct communication from the internet to TCP port 443, right? In this scenario, if you look at the VM with two NICs, though both the NICs are connected to the subnet, which are private subnet. That means the IP addresses which will be assigned to your NIC will be private in nature. but you want direct communication from the internet. So what is the first thing that you require? You require a public IP address. Okay, so let's see which of these says that have a public IP address. The first option says remove the private IP address from NIC2 and then assign. Can you remove a private IP address? I've already told you cannot remove it. So simply ignore this option. Add a third NIC and associate a public IP address to it. Then create an inbound security rule. This can be possible. This can be one of the answer, but let's look at other possibilities. Associate a public IP address to NIC2 and create an inbound security rule. What this third option is saying that in the existing NIC2, create or attach a new public IP address and then create an inbound security rule, which can also be the answer. And the fourth one says create an inbound security rule for TCP port 443. Yes, we want to create an inbound security rule, but we want access to the internet as well, right? Which can only come if you have public IP address, which it doesn't give us in the fourth option. So the two options which are left with me is either create a new NIC and attach public IP address to it, then create an inbound security rule on port 443, or on an existing NIC create an inbound security rule by simply attaching a public IP address, right? Now, in this scenario, what situation is much better? Creating a new NIC or adding the public IP to the existing NIC? It says, the question also says, maintain a simple configuration whenever possible, right? So which one should I would go to? Although both of them will solve me the purpose, I should go with this option because I'm assigning the public IP address to an existing network interface card, and then I'm creating a security rule. That means this option will give me much simple configuration than creating a new NIC and then creating a public subnet. So the answer will be the third one. Review question 7. You have several VMs in Microsoft Azure. All the VMs are configured with default IP addressing solution. A VM named VM1 is assigned the IP address of 172.16.10.100. You stop and deallocate VM to perform some disk maintenance activity. Very important part of the question is all the VMs are configured with default IP addressing solution. Remember, when you create a virtual machine with default settings, by default the IP address that has been given to you is dynamic in nature. You can also check it from here. If I go to my virtual machines, and if I click it here, and if I go to networking, then this is my network interface card, right? I'm going to my network interface card, and in the network interface card, go to IP configurations, and you can see that the IP which is assigned to me, private IP address, it's dynamic in nature. So by default, all the IP addresses that you will get, the private IP addresses that you will get, will be dynamic in nature. You can make it static, but that has to be manually done by you. Default configuration always gives you dynamic private IP address. Now let's move back to the question. So you have been assigned an IP address of this. You stop and deallocate VMs to perform some disk maintenance activity. Also remember, this is something that I've told you before. If you stop and deallocate a virtual machine, dynamic IP addresses will no longer be available to you because it goes back to the IP pool. Dynamic IPs will change if you stop and deallocate your VM. During that time, another administrator deploys a new VM named VM25. Later, after VM1 comes back online, you notice that its IP address is changed, which is evident. Your IP address was gone. It was dynamic in nature. When you stopped and deallocated it, it returned back to the pool. Somewhere, some other administrator created a new VM, and that VM has been allocated that particular IP address. So now VM25 is assigned the 72.16.10.100 IP address. Now you need to ensure that VM1 maintains the IP address of 172.16.10.0. All other VMs should have their IP address automatically allocated. In this scenario, what should you do? First of all, if you want your VM to have a particular IP addresses always assigned to it, make sure it is static in nature, not dynamic. That's the first rule. But now already your IP address has been allocated to some other VM. What should you do in this scenario? You can choose two options. First option says stop and deallocate VM1. Okay, stop and deallocate VM1. Why should I do that? My virtual machine 1 is already deallocated, right? And it has come back online and it has gone a new IP address. Start VM1, it is already started, right? Stop and deallocate VM25. Now this is something that I need to do. Why? Because 172.16.10.100 is assigned to VM25, right? And how can I retrieve it back? Only when I stop and deallocate VM25. Then this IP will again go back to the pool. So the first thing that I need to do is stop and deallocate VM25. Now start VM25. No, you don't have to start it right away. Configure VM1 with static IP address of 172.16.10.100. This is the second thing that you need to do. So what happens now is your VM1 is now running with a new IP address, right? Your VM25 is now running with the IP address that you want VM1 to have. First of all, you will stop and deallocate VM25. The IP address will return to the pool, right, which you require. Then you will go to VM1. You will go to its IP address, network interface card. Then you will go to the IP address, and just like I've shown you in here, you will go to the IP address. By default, it will be dynamic and IP address will be assigned to VM1. Go to static and change the IP address in here which you want. In this scenario, it will be 172.168.10.0 or whatever the IP was in here. And then save the setting. Then you will get the IP address. So what will be the option? Option will be, the answers will be third one and fifth one. Stop and deallocate VM25 and configure VM1 with a static IP address of 172.16.10.0. Okay. Question 8. You're currently using network security groups to control how your network traffic flows in and out of your virtual network subnets and network interfaces. Alright, good. You want to customize how your NSGs work. For all incoming traffic, you need to apply your security rules to both the virtual machine and the subnet level. Very simple question. If you want to have a rule apply both at the virtual machine and the subnet level, what you will do? Okay, first of all, configure the allow VNet inbound security rule for all new NSG. No, you don't have to do this. This is a default rule. Allow VNet inbound is a default rule which I have shown to you. Create rules for both NIC and subnet with an allow action. Yes, that is something that you need to do, right? Since it says you need to apply your security rules both at the virtual machine and subnet level, so you have to create rules for both NIC and subnet with an allow action. Third option says delete the default rules. This is not possible. You cannot delete it. But what you can do, you can add rules with a higher priority than default rules. They will simply override it. So second and fourth will be the answer. You have Azure Virtual Machine that has a multi-network interface with private IP addressing. To which IP address in Azure Managed DNS is the host mapping mapped? Okay, this is one good question. When you have multiple network interface card attached to a virtual machine in Azure, right? Each network interface card will have its own set of private IP address. By default, name resolution happens in Azure. If you're not using your own DNS, it happens due to because of Azure Managed DNS. So by default, when you ping your VM with its name, let's say the name of your VM is VM1, and you're pinging your VM with its name. So which IP it will return to? Network interface card 1 IP or 2 IP or 3 IP. If you have multiple network interface card, it should at least return one IP address, right? So which one it should return to you? It will return you the IP of the primary network interface card. Always remember that. It won't give you all the IPs of all the network interface card attached to the VM. It will only give the IP of the primary network interface card, right? That you have created. Right, so the primary network interface IP addresses will be returned in case you are trying to get it from the Azure Managed DNS. Question 10, you need to ensure that Azure DNS can resolve names for your registered domain. What should you do? If you want that Azure DNS can resolve names for your registered domain, you have to create a zone delegation. That is what is required on the Azure DNS level, right? Why zone delegation? Because see, it says you want to ensure that Azure DNS can resolve names for your registered domain. So you already have the domain, you are running it inside your own DNS server. What you need to do is you simply want to extend that DNS server capability to Azure DNS. So for that purpose, your Azure DNS should know what is your primary DNS server, where it is located. That is done by using zone delegation. So these are all the questions which are available in module fourth of Azure networking. If you are not able to understand any question, please leave it in the comments and I will have a look at it and I will explain to you in a better manner. These are all the 10 questions. Hopefully, I believe you have understood it because I have explained it in a very detailed manner. So that is all, guys. After this, we'll start with module fifth, which is much more interesting because in that we will be talking about the connections between virtual networks. So it's very, very important and very, very interesting in nature. So I'll see you in that one. Till then, have a good day and please subscribe to my channel and share it with anybody who wants to learn Azure. Thanks a lot. Bye.